Last week, we talked about the blessings leading up to Shema. We talked about them in depth to understand a little bit of what we're talking about, for why we're saying them, why we have brachot before we start Shema. And then when we start, we're gonna break them up over the next 3 weeks. We're gonna do this time. We're only gonna do Shema. Next week Vahaya, and the week after that we will do Vayomer, so that we can give each one the amount of time that it needs. First, let's just start with understanding the plain words. Page 90 and 92. That's what we're gonna be doing tonight. We start with Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel, listen, the nation of Israel. God is our God. God is one. Then we say, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. Blessed is the name of His glorious kingdom for all eternity. 92. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol ma'odecha. You should love Hashem, your God, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your resources. Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele. And these things that I am telling you today, that I'm commanding you today, they should be upon your heart. Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'velechtecha b'derech u'v'shachbecha u'v'kumecha. And you should repeat them and learn them with your son, with your children, and you should discuss them when you are sitting at home, when you are walking on your path, b'shachbecha, when you are lying down, u'v'kumecha, when you are standing up. And you should tie them as a sign upon your arm, and it should be a memory between your eyes, and you should write them on the doorposts of your house and your gates. So now let's start from the beginning. We start with that little line before Shema Yisrael, El Melech Ne'eman. When we have a minyan, then the Chazan finishes the 3 prakim of Shema, and he finishes and says, Hashem Elokechem Emet. That is in the end of Vayomer. When the end of Vayomer, the Chazan would repeat it after everybody else finishes. But when you do not have a minyan, when you are praying by yourself, then you start out Shema with El Melech Ne'eman. El Melech Ne'eman, there's 2 different reasons for it. One is the first letter of each one of these words, El Melech Ne'eman, spelled together, Amen. Okay? Which is very similar to Hashem Elokechem Emet. Amen literally means it is true, emet. So when I'm finishing it and saying Hashem Elokechem Emet, or El Melech Ne'eman, I'm giving that stamp of approval of saying this is true. Okay? Why do we say Amen after brachot? Someone makes a bracha, we say Amen. It is true what you said. Okay? We have psukim that finish with Selah, right? Which is again saying this is sealed. This is true. This is what it is. The other reason is there are 248, or what's called a ramach, evarim, organs in a person's body. There's also 248 mitzvot aseh, positive commandments that we are supposed to do. The purpose of Shema, that we're going to talk about this week and next week, and even the week afterwards in some part of it, is to establish our relationship with Hashem and accept the mitzvot. So if I'm supposed to accept the mitzvot, then I should keep this in mind. How am I keeping this in mind? Every single word in Shema, if you count all of the words of Shema, it comes out to be 245. 245, I'm missing 3, so either El Melech Ne'eman or Hashem Elokechem Emet, that it is repeated in the end. Okay, so these are 2 different reasons that we're looking at why we start out with El Melech Ne'eman if we do not have a minyan. Okay? Then, now let's get into the actual Shema. We did discuss this briefly when we were talking about it in the previous set of classes when we talked about Shema, but we'll get even deeper into it. So, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. When we're saying Shema, right? Listen, Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is one. Who are we who's supposed to be saying this? Who's supposed to be saying this? Who's supposed to hear it? When we're saying it, it sounds like I'm only speaking in a way to Am Yisrael. But we know that the entire world needs to know that there's one God. It is Bnei Noach have also a commandment of keeping the 7 commandments of Bnei Noach, and the first one is believe in one God. Therefore, shouldn't it just say, listen, the world, everybody, God is one God, right? So over here, when you're looking at it, it's also an understanding of right now we're saying it for ourselves, and in the future the world will know. It also comes from a pasuk, from a midrash that talks about Yaakov and his children, and we'll talk about that also in a second, of that they tell him, Shema Yisrael, listen, our father Israel, we believe in the same God that you believe in. So there's different ways of looking at it. But this pasuk, you're supposed to be able to concentrate in all of the prayers, right? You're supposed to not have anything else on your mind. But especially in the first pasuk of Shema, if you didn't have kavanah, if you weren't focused while you were saying it, you have to repeat Shema, that pasuk again. Okay, like what we said about Ashrei 2 weeks ago, right? That there's that one pasuk of Potech et Yadecha, that's the whole essence. So if the entire essence of Shema, of all of these 3 parashot, is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, then you must repeat it. You must repeat it while you are focused. When I'm looking at it and saying, I want everybody to hear, God is our God, God is one. What is this oneness? What is one God? 2 different options. First option is that there aren't 2 gods or multiple gods. This gets into a very long discussion, which I will very briefly address, which is, what do we have a commandment to believe in? The Rambam, who writes one of the books of what's called Sifrei Mitzvot, that counts all of the 613 mitzvot, divides this mitzvah into 2. Believing in God and believing that there's one God, the oneness of God. And according to quite a few different opinions, there's something that is called in many different religions, and including Bnei Noach and Noahites in this category, that we have a commandment to believe only in one God, and not to believe in any of God's assistants or helpers in any way. And other nations have a commandment to believe in one God, but not only in one God. Okay, this is a quite popular opinion according to many commentaries, that they look and they say, if I were to believe, right, like there's a king, and you want to praise the king by also praising his servants, right? So the sun, the moon, anything else, right? Praising God through anything else other than just God himself. Okay? According to Maimonides and almost everybody else, in Judaism you're not allowed to praise God through praising other things. But for other nations, if they also believe, right, in other servants of God that God created, and they say there's only one God, but Muhammad is his prophet, right? That does not constitute a idol worshiping. Okay? So for non-Jews, they don't need to believe in the oneness. We do. Okay? So that's the first way of looking at it. And again, you can get into this conversation. It's a very, very long conversation about why they can believe in more in more servants or other deities that God created. But the other thing is, obviously, in the most simplistic way, believing that there's one God. Now, something that we did mention beforehand, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper now, is the fact that there's only God, right? The oneness of God being that there's only God in the world, and that there isn't anything else. Nothing else exists in this world. So when we're looking at all of everything in the world, let's go back to Bereshit, the creation of the world. We're on page 90. So when you look at the creation of the world, it says God says, and the world is created, right? God says there's light, and now there's light. God says now the water will separate, and it separates. God says there will be land, and there will be land. And often we think of ourselves and of everything else as sort of separated from God. God created, and now we are our own independent beings. The Zohar says that everything that God creates is in a constant renewal of creation, which means the word that God used to create everything is still being spoken. It is still being said. And therefore, if God stopped saying it, then everything ceased to exist. So in other words, everything is from God. Everything is, in a way, God. And the deeper you get into that kind of discussion and philosophy, right? This is another part of the Zohar of Memale kol almin v'sovev kol almin. God surrounds the world and inhabits everything in the world, and there is nothing in the world that isn't God, right? Everything in this world has a part of God in him. And therefore, that is what makes us who we are. That's what makes things happen and move. And the good and bad, all of that is from God. And that's why what we talked about last week of Yotzer Or Uvoreh Choshech, God creates light and the darkness, okay? And the origin of the pasuk of Uvoreh Tara, not and creates everything, but necessarily creates the bad, okay? That the bad also comes. So everything in this world comes from God. So when I am saying Hashem Echad, God is one, I'm referring to the oneness of God. Everything that is happening, everything is in God's control. So what do I need to focus on? We said that if you're not focused in these words, you need to repeat Shema. The word Echad, the last word, the word one, has possibly the most comments about it from any other word in Shema in all the commentaries. So the Aleph of Echad, it goes by numerical value, okay? So this is what's called Sod. Sod are the, not Sod, Remez, okay? Remez, what's hinted in the words, okay? So we have three letters of Echad. Aleph, which is valued at 1, Chet, which is valued at 8, Dalet, which is valued at 4. Okay, so according to the Aleph Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Chet being number 8, right? So each one of them has their own value. Aleph, God is 1. That's easy, that's simple. Chet is valued at 8. Any time that we have the number 8 represented in anything, we use the word Me'al HaTeva, above creation, above nature. God creates the world in 7 days. Therefore, anything above that, or the number 8, is above the laws of nature. God is outside of the world and is running everything outside of the laws of nature, outside of what's normal, what's expected. Daled, the last letter, the 4 is valued at 4. Okay, that is for the 4 winds, in either way, in all directions. So we have a whole bunch of things like that. We have, let's say, the tzitzit that has 4 corners, and we say me'arba kanfot haaretz, right? We say this in Shmoneh Esrei, bring us from all corners of the world, from the 4 corners. So whenever we talk about 4, we're saying from everywhere. So God is 1. God is above everything else, right? He doesn't have an equal. He doesn't have anything that is binding him, that he is forced to. And God is controls over the four winds of the world, right? North, east, north, south, east, west, right? So like the entire world, right? So that is Echad. Now look at that pasuk. Something should pop out at you ever so slightly on the Hebrew side. Okay, there's six words. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Something should pop out that there is that inside in the letters themselves. What do you see?
Some are larger.
Some are larger. Two are larger. Okay, the two that are larger is the Ayin of Shema, the last letter of Shema. Okay, and the last letter of Echad. So the Ayin and the Daled are larger than everything else. So you said very well. Ed. Okay, Ed means someone who's bearing testimony. When we're coming up and we're saying, I'm bearing testimony to everything that I'm saying now, that God created the world, that God rules the world, all of these things. Shema Yisrael, listen to what I'm saying. God is our God. God is one. Okay. Now you'll see this very common in Yemenite communities, but a lot it has spread in other communities as well. That you prolong the sound of Echad. So you say Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You prolong the Chet and you prolong the Dalet. Okay? And this is to focus on those things. Focus on the Chet, on God is above nature, and focus on that God rules the entire world. Now, when we are saying Shema, we cover our eyes. We cover our eyes so that we can focus, disconnect from everything else. You'll notice also that I try to put my talit over my head before I say Shema, as also a way of concentrating, of tuning everything else out to be able to. Sometimes when I'm leading and there are people who won't be able to hear me as well, I don't do it. But I try to, if I'm not leading, I will almost always, if I remember, put it over my head and then say Shema. So we cover our eyes two common ways. One is you cover your eyes this way. The other one that you'll see sometimes is people do it in this kind of way, which has the letter Shin in their forehead. Okay, so two different ways of doing it. This is more traditional Ashkenazi covering, and this is more Hasidic and Sfaradi custom of covering their eyes in that kind of way for saying Shema. Once we said the pasuk of Shema, and you're supposed to focus on it. So for focusing on it, there are people who also try to stop before saying Shema, take a breath, cover your eyes, and then say Shema. Don't rush into it. We say it out loud, right? This is an announcement. Everybody should hear. And then we say quietly, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto La'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom for all eternity. Now, mention this briefly, but also for anyone who doesn't remember, and also for anyone who's online who didn't hear this previously, Baruch Shem Kevod is not found in the Torah. So, there's two different sources of where this comes from. The first source comes from the story of Yaakov and his children. Yaakov gathers his sons, and before he dies, and he says, I have a prophecy to tell you that what's going to happen. You're now down in Egypt. I want you to know that you are going to be enslaved. I want you to know that you're going to be coming out of there, and that it's all going to be okay, and this is part of the planning. You'll receive the Torah, and you'll go into Israel, and here's God's plan, right? It's a prophecy. Yaakov knows this. Comes to say it, v'nistalka mimeno. It disappears from him. And he looks around and he says, maybe one of my children is not worthy of hearing this prophecy. Maybe my children don't really believe in the oneness of God. They maybe believe in God, but not in the oneness of God. So then they say, Shema Yisrael, listen, our father Israel, which is another name for Yaakov, right? Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God. God is one. We agree to what we believe in, what you believe in. And then he blesses God and says, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto L'olam Va'ed. Blessed is his name. Okay? That is the first source of it. And because it is not written in the Torah, we say it quietly. That's the first opinion. Second opinion says this is when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to Har Sinai, and when he's on Mount Sinai, he hears this prayer from the angels, and he brings it down to the world. But because it's a prayer of the angels, and we discussed this also last time, about what prayers from the angels do we say and how do we say them, when we'll talk about the repetition of the Amidah and Kedusha, then we'll really focus on the prayers of the angels and how we stand and how we talk and how we pray and how we focus. But because it was stolen from the angels, it's inappropriate because we are not in the level of the angels to be saying this prayer all the time. So we say it quietly. But on Yom Kippur, when we're not eating and we're not drinking and we are dressed in white and like angels, then we can say it out loud like the angels. That's Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto L'olam Va'ed. Now, we're going into Ve'ahavta, page 92. Ve'ahavta, and you should love God. You should love God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might, or all of your resources. How can we be commanded to love? Okay, how can you be commanded on an emotion? You can be commanded on anything that is in your control, right? Don't eat this, keep Shabbat, right? Like, here are things that you can be, don't kill, don't steal. These are things that are in your control, right? Control my hands, I control my feet, my emotions. Can I be commanded to love? This also goes into a question of a few other mitzvahs that fall into this category, like lo tachmod, don't want what other people have, right? One of the 10 commandments of don't be jealous of people, but that's an emotion. How can I be commanded on an emotion? So Maimonides also explains this when it comes to the war. It says that you're not allowed to be afraid when you're going into war. It's very normal to be afraid when you go into war. It's terrifying, right? He says, don't think about the things that will scare you when you're going into war, because you need to be brave. And just like that, we look at it over here. You have a commandment to love God. How? Hamach shalit al halev. The mind controls the heart. In other words, your thoughts control your emotions. So, do things that will make you love God. Let's go into a discussion that comes from Michtav Meliyahu. Rav Eliyahu Dessler, who writes a book, Michtav Meliyahu, a letter from Eliyahu, amazing book, talks about what causes love. It's one of the subjects he brings up. He says, does giving or receiving, what causes you to love more? He says the entire world is under the illusion that the more I receive, the more I love. Right? Like, think about yourself. What would you rather? Would you rather get or would you rather give? You'd rather get. You'd rather have someone shower you with love and take care of you, and from that place you can love more. But he says the truth is we love because we're invested. The more we give, the more we love. The more we spend on something, the more we'll love it, or the more we'll love them, right? And when I'm thinking of in my relationship with God, it's not only about what I'm receiving, it's a lot more about what I'm giving. What am I doing? You want to love God? Build your relationship. Work on that relationship, right? Think about what should your relationship look like with God. And then it goes into detail and says with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might, right? And you can say, okay, I'm doing it completely. This will put me in that kind of position, in that kind of situation, right? But what can I do to enrich my relationship with God? What in my day-to-day life, right, can I do? Someone asked me, says, is there a prayer that I could do that, to pray in the morning that my day will go well? And I said, yes. the morning prayer, right? It's not about it's not a magical prayer that you'll do, and right, it's not a genie that you get 3 wishes and that's how God works, right? You want to have a relationship with God, have a relationship with God. Wake up in the morning, go pray. Stop in the middle of the day, pray. In the evening, pray, right? What do you eat? Have that kind of relationship, right? Have a diet that is agreed upon. Have Shabbat, that is our time now with God. It's our spiritual time. That's how you reach love. You reach love because you're invested. And then it breaks it down, so it says, B'chol levavcha, with all of your heart. So what is with all of your heart? If it was with your heart, it would say B'chol halev, with all of heart, right? But it's levavcha, it's 2, right? So Chazal tell us, they say, B'shtei yetzarecha, b'yetzer hatov u'v'yetzer hara, with both of your inclinations, with your good inclination and your evil inclination, okay? With both parts, your heart is divided into 2. One part of your heart is completely spiritual, right? That part of your heart, it's very easy for it to be connected to God and to love God because it's kind of what it's meant to do, right? You have 2 parts of your being in a way. One part that just wants spirituality and elevation, and the other part that is your animalistic side that just wants to enjoy this world. It says, so your Yetzer Hatov, that part of you that just wants to get close to God, that part, okay, is obvious. But the real challenge is to get your evil inclination, the part of you that doesn't want to have the relationship, that part of you that wants to be just in this world, to elevate that. So that should have summed up everything else. But it continues and says, B'chol nafshecha, with all of your soul, right? So there's a few different ways of reading that, right? One of saying, well, if I love something with my heart, then it's really just when I'm around it, or it'll pop into my mind and go, wow, I really love that, right? A certain food that you're like, oh, I really love that food, right? It's not all consuming, right? It's not your entire existence. It is something that when I see it, I'm excited by it. But that's not love, right? What's b'chol nafshecha? It consumes you completely. That your entire being becomes about this. Rav Shlomo Karlebach says, if I like someone, then if someone doesn't like them, it's okay, right? It's okay if that person, not everybody likes them. But if I really love someone with my whole heart and someone doesn't like them, I can't understand it. I can't understand why someone wouldn't love, right? You think about this with your children. You go, I love my children so much. I can't imagine someone not loving my children. It would bother me if someone doesn't love my children, right? But a friend of mine, who I very much like, someone doesn't love them, that's okay, right? That's them. But my children, right? So that's one opinion of B'chol nafshecha. The more extreme opinion, which is the more popular opinion about this, is Afilo notel et nafshecha lamut. Even if you are going to die for this, which means sacrificing your life, right? This is in no way trying to make this an ideal of death, but realizing that throughout all of Jewish history, Jews were killed for not being for being Jewish and for not being willing to convert. And the last words that they said were Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Always. That is the final words of a Jewish person. Is I believe in one God. I'm not going to become Christian. I'm not going to change my religion. I'm staying Jewish. I'm staying in my belief, right? And this is a very, very hard thing. It's not an ideal, right? It's not that you should try to die in God's name. You should live by God's name. You should live to sanctify God and not to die in His name. But if it comes down to it, you should be prepared to die on God's name. You should be prepared to say, I'm dying because I believe, right? I believe in God. I believe in the Torah, in the nation, and everything that God has told us to do. There's a lot of stories about that, but we'll put that aside for a second. When we look at the first two, with all of your heart and with all of your soul, then it finishes with all of your might. All of your might, more commonly interpreted as with all of your resources. With your money, they'll go, what's the connection, right? I already said I'm willing to die for God. Money, is that the concern? Right? Like if someone says, pulls out a knife and says, give me your money or give me your wallet or I'll kill you. You give them your wallet, right? You don't mess around. So it's clear to us that your life is worth more than money. So why even put it over here? Why even put your money down as anything important? And this is something that I feel like is very easy for us to understand and almost impossible for us to do without, like, on automatic. Like, we need to stop and think about it. When I tell you you have an ideal that you're willing to die for, no problem. People will die for their ideals. People will stand, they'll fight, they'll live by their ideals, they'll die for their ideals because that's what an ideal is. But putting your money where your mouth is, that's very difficult, right? People are ready to die for a lot of things, but to actually invest in doing things, that doesn't work. I'm Jewish, I will fight for my country, I will fight for my God, but closing my business on Shabbos, no, that I can't do, right? This is something that is very much a part of us, is when it comes to our day-to-day life, no. The big gestures, we're all about the big gestures. I'm not going to miss Yom Kippur. I'm not going to miss Pesach. I'm not going to miss the big holidays. Am I going to live my life, a Jewish life throughout the week? Maybe not. Okay? That's a lot to ask. But I'll do the big ones, right? If there's gas chambers, okay, I'll go to the gas chambers, right? But to live your life as a Jew, that's much harder. It's much harder than dying as a Jew, okay? Living your life as a Jew. And that is something that when you read it that way, say, okay, that one can be put higher up than dying to try to live your life properly, okay? And then it's telling you, so now that we've established, love God with everything you have, then we say, and these things that I'm commanding you today, they should be on your heart. You should keep them close to you. What does this mean? Today. Today, every single day, like you are receiving them for the first time. When we have something that we're very familiar with, it's very easy to let things get old. What do we want? We want the excitement as if we're getting the Torah for the first time today, right? For those of you who went through a conversion, right? When you were learning and building up and go through a conversion, it's very exciting. Keeping the excitement going afterwards is very hard, right? So you work on it and you say, okay, it's not I reached my conversion and that was the pinnacle of my religious experience, but rather this is where it started. Up till now was just learning. Now it's when it starts. Now is when I'm working. And every single day have that excitement. We read for between the beginning of Elul until after Simchat Torah, we read Le David Hashem every single day, twice a day. It's a psalm from King David, and it repeats itself. We say it as part of the prayers in the morning, at night, every single day. And one pasuk over there is Shivti b'Beit Hashem kol yemei chayai lachazot b'noam Hashem ulevaker be'echalo. I want to sit in God's house, and I want to come and visit all the time. Contradicts itself, right? Do you want to be a guest, or do you want to be or do you want to be a invited as an honorary guest, a guest of honor, or do you want to feel like a child in your parents' home, right? And you think about it, if you were invited to the king's house, right? One time, you would be terrified and ecstatic, and you would wear your best clothes, and you would be proper, and you would stick to protocol, right? And if after that meeting, the king said, come back tomorrow, right? You would come back and you would still be terrified, right? And after a year or two, when every single day you're there, you let your guard down, right? And you don't show up as sharp, right? You don't work with protocol anymore. Now you're talking like friends as opposed to like a subordinate, right? And that's a problem, right? But I want to feel like a housemate. I also want to feel like a guest. And David HaMelech says this. He says, I want to be in God's house all the time. I want to live in God's palace. But I always want to remember that I'm a guest. I always want to have that excitement and enthusiasm of the first time. That is Hayom. The Torah is given to us every single day today. We say this also in 2 weeks from now when we'll talk about it, about when we're leaving Egypt. Okay? We're going to talk about it in Vayomer, in the third parsha of Shema. And when we talk about Vayomer, we say, when we left Egypt, it's if I myself left Egypt. Yes, it happened 3,000 years ago, but I need to appreciate my freedom as if it was just given to me. I need to have that kind of appreciation. And it continues, and it says, Vishinantam levanech, and repeat these things to your children. Don't keep it for yourself. Anything that you learn, and it is just for you, what was the purpose of it, right? If you've learned physics and never taught physics, and never used physics, then why did you bother to learn it, right? Learn something to use it. And what's the best way of using? Teaching on, passing on to the next generation. Okay, and get involved in it, discuss it, ask questions about it. Don't just take the Torah as is. Learn it, understand. When you are in the comfort of your home, and when you are in the path going. So when we're at home, there's parts of it that are easier. I have my routine. I can wake up in the morning, I have a book, I can sit, I can learn, I can have a morning and evening and daily routine, right? The other problem with at home is I have a routine, right? I have a routine, not necessarily includes learning. When I'm on the path and I'm going, the challenges are exactly the opposite. It's, well, I don't have some sort of routine, so that's much harder to try to follow, but I have an opportunity, right? I have an opportunity that maybe I didn't have in my day-to-day routine. Today, it's actually really easy, this part of V'lechtecha b'derech, okay? You're driving to work, you can listen to a class. Most of the things you can get on podcasts, on YouTube, okay? These classes all go up on YouTube for this exact purpose, right? So that people can continue learning, okay? While they're driving, while they're working out, while they're, right? Like there's so much that you can listen to and you can do as part of your routine. You're traveling, you have something, listen to a class, bring a little book with you, right? There's so much that you can do. There was a rabbi who said when they asked him, like, how did he become such a big rabbi? He said in 5 minutes. He says, I had 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. Like, that's how he lived his life. He says, I'm waiting in the bank, I've got 5 minutes, I take out a Mishnah. I'm waiting, in the line in the supermarket, I open up a book, right? Like, he always had a little book with him, and he would open it up, sit, and he would learn. Doesn't matter where you're at. You're waiting in line. We're waiting in lines all the time, everywhere, right? You're going to Nayo House to go get things done. Hey, you can be sitting there for hours. Bring a little book with you. Open it up. Bring earphones up and listen to a class, right? There's so much that you can keep on learning all the time. Don't waste your time. And when you are going to sleep and when you are waking up. This we learn two different things from. The first thing that we learn is that we say Shema at morning and at night, when we are lying down and when we are waking up. Okay? There's another time that we say Shema of when we're lying down, and that's when someone's dying. When someone dies, you say Shema with them, and it is what we say the ultimate lying down, right? It's like you're lying down, and there's the ultimate getting up, which is Tchiyat HaMetim, when God revives the dead, right? And that's when you're supposed to say Shema when you are revived in the future, right? So we say Shema at that point. But this whole thing is also talking about learning Torah and dealing with Torah, which means you also have a commandment to learn Torah in the morning and at night. We were talking about this in our halacha classes, and we said that the bare minimum, if you don't have time for anything else, is you say Shema in the morning at night, and this counts as learning Torah because it is from the Torah in the morning and at night. But if you are able to learn anything else during the day, you should set aside time every morning and every night to learn a little bit more so that you have a learning routine in the morning and at night. Okay, every day. And you shall tie these things as a sign on your arm. Now, when we put on tefillin, that is what we're tying on as a sign. Okay, we tie them, we put it on our left hand, the majority of us, put it on our left hand, facing our heart. And as a memory between your eyes. So it's not physically between your eyes, it's on the top of your head where your hairline stops, or where it was, and where you put it on top, okay? And it is in the same line as your eyes, okay? And that's supposed to be one towards your emotions and one towards your mind, right? So we always think of the heart as emotional, even though, right, it pumps blood, but it's as a sign to focus my emotions and my mind in a way of Torah and remembering, okay? And we can talk about tefillin more in depth another time. And you should write them on the mezuzot, okay, on the doorposts of your house, okay? We write down the Shema as well, and in the entrance of the cities. The entrance of the cities, part of it is because that's where the entire community lives, but more importantly is the entrance of the city is where the judges used to sit, okay? It says, V'hu yoshev b'sha'ar ha'ir, talking about Lot, right? He is judging the people. He is sitting in the entrance of the city. So you would have a mezuzah over there also to remember these things, right? Everything that we've talked about right now is that relationship with God. When we're talking about Shema, we refer to it and say, this is Ol Malchut Shemayim. I am receiving the yoke of my commitment of my relationship with God. That is what I'm initiating over here with Shema and Ve'ahavta. I'm initiating a relationship that I would like it to be strong. Okay? Where do I want that? I want it for my heart, my emotions, for my mind, for my making decisions. I want it with my children. I want it in my home. I want it when I'm dealing in business. I want it in with my judges. I want it in every aspect of my life. So going back to b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meodecha, right? You could say God is for the synagogue only, right? What kind of relationship is that? God is for the synagogue only. God needs to be in your day-to-day life in everything you do, right? Everything you do. And that's part of tzitzit, and we'll talk about that in Vayikra. Okay, with this we finished Shema. Are there any questions about Shema? No? Okay. Yes?